The day you went quiet, they panicked, because silence doesn't mean confusion. Silence means you saw everything and they lost access. Toxic people don't fear anger. Anger keeps you engaged. Anger keeps you reachable. They fear the moment you stop reacting. No explanations, no defending yourself, no emotional energy left to drain. Because when you go silent, their control collapses. This video isn't about revenge, it's about something worse for them: irrelevance. Tonight, I'll break down 7 silent behaviors that strip toxic people of power without confrontation. No drama, no closure, just quiet dominance. Watch closely. 1. You observe instead of react. There is a moment in every person's life when power quietly changes hands. Not when you raise your voice, not when you finally explain yourself perfectly, not when you win the argument, but when you stop reacting. Because toxic people don't fear confrontation. They fear control slipping. They don't feed on truth. They feed on response. They poke. They provoke. They twist your words. They cross lines, just enough to see what gets a reaction. And here's the part most people miss. They're not trying to communicate with you. They're testing you. Because every emotional reaction gives them information. Anger tells them where to push. Defensiveness tells them where you doubt yourself. Over-explaining tells them you still want approval. Nervous laughter tells them you're uncomfortable. Silence tells them nothing. And silence is the one thing manipulators cannot use. Reaction is data, and toxic people are professional data collectors. They watch your face. They measure your tone. They remember what broke your composure. They store it. Then they reuse it later, at the worst moment. That's why arguments with toxic people feel repetitive. They are not trying to resolve anything. They are building a file on you. They want to learn what makes you feel guilty, what makes you defend yourself, what makes you chase peace, what makes you compromise your boundaries, what makes you stay. Because once they know your pattern, they don't need to overpower you. They just need to press the right button. But then something changes. One day, they provoke you, and you don't respond the old way. They say something disrespectful. You don't flinch. They bait you emotionally. You don't rush to correct them. They throw in a jab, a sigh, a passive insult, and they wait for the familiar explosion, explanation, or defense. And it never comes. You pause. And that pause is not weakness. That pause is you taking your power back. Because the pause breaks the script. You stop being automatic. Stop being predictable. Stop being readable. Instead of reacting, you observe. Quietly, calmly, without urgency. And that is when the dynamic starts collapsing. Because observation removes you from the emotional battlefield. You're no longer fighting to be understood, no longer trying to clear things up, no longer managing their feelings about your boundaries, no longer proving your intentions to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You're watching. And toxic people hate being watched. Because when you observe, you stop being emotionally available. And when you stop being emotionally available, they lose control. Why? Because silence gives them no feedback, no leverage, no fuel, no handle. They can't read you, they can't steer you, they can't predict you. And to a manipulative person, unpredictability feels like danger. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That isn't poetry, that's an instruction. The moment another person's behavior dictates your emotional state, you hand them the keys to your inner world. Stoicism isn't about being cold, it's about being unprovocable. And when you become unprovocable, something powerful happens. You start seeing patterns, not just what they said, but why they said it. Not just what they did, but when they did it. You begin noticing how they escalate when ignored, how they shift blame when confronted, how guilt appears when they feel you pulling away, how they create confusion to avoid accountability, how they pretend to misunderstand simple boundaries. You stop hearing words, you start watching behavior, and behavior never lies. This is why awareness terrifies toxic people. They can manipulate emotion, they can manipulate confusion, they can manipulate your need for peace, but they cannot manipulate clarity, because clarity makes you dangerous, clarity makes you calm, and calm makes them powerless. Now it becomes psychological chess. They move, you don't rush. They provoke, you remain still. They escalate, you observe. They threaten distance, you don't beg. They guilt trip, you don't explain. And slowly they start panicking because you're no longer predictable, no longer readable, no longer emotionally reachable on demand. You look like someone who could walk away and not come back. That's quiet power, not loud, not aggressive, grounded, immovable. And here's the real shift. When you stop reacting, they're forced to sit with themselves. They start asking questions they never wanted to face. Why aren't they reacting? Did they figure me out? Why does their silence feel heavier than my words? What if I don't matter to them anymore? And that last question is the one that hits them hardest. Because when you stop reacting, you stop proving they matter. Observation is the first step of transformation. It's the shift from their power over you to your power over yourself, from emotional reflex to deliberate response. Remember this: the person who reacts is being led. The person who observes is choosing. And once your piece has no handle, toxic people don't know where to strike. You don't defeat them by being louder. You defeat them by being unmoved. And in the next chapter, I'll show you the second behavior that scares them even more, because it doesn't just remove your reaction, it removes your words. 2. You speak less, but with precision. Toxic people are most comfortable when you talk too much. They relax when you explain yourself. They feel safe when you justify your decisions. They feel powerful when you overshare your emotions, because every extra word gives them information. Every explanation becomes leverage. Every emotional paragraph becomes material. Every attempt to be understood becomes an opening. That's why silence unsettles them. Not awkward silence, not passive silence, but intentional restraint. There was a time you filled every pause. You rushed to clarify your intentions. You defended decisions that needed no defense. You explained your boundaries as if they were negotiable. You spoke, not because you had to, but because you didn't want to be misunderstood. Not because you were weak, but because you were conscientious. But toxic people don't value conscience, they value access. And access is granted through words. So one day, something changes. You stop narrating your inner world. You stop translating your thoughts for people who misuse them. You stop responding with paragraphs. You still speak, but only when it matters. And when you do, your words land differently. Short, measured, deliberate. No emotional overflow, no extra detail, no unnecessary exposure. This is when the balance of power shifts again. Because toxic people don't fear loud voices. They fear controlled ones. They don't fear shouting. They fear someone who doesn't need to shout. They ask, "Why didn't you reply?" You answer, "I didn't need to." They press, "Do you have something to say?" You reply, "You already know." They probe, "Are you upset?" You say, "I'm aware," and you stop there. No clarification, no justification, no emotional explanation, and suddenly your silence becomes louder than anything they say, because minimal speech creates psychological weight. When someone talks constantly, their words dissolve into noise. When someone speaks sparingly, each sentence carries gravity. A single sentence from a quiet person echoes longer than a speech from a desperate one. People replay it, they analyze it, they sit with it, because silence forces reflection. This isn't coldness, this is emotional discipline. You're not withholding communication, you're protecting it from being wasted. You're choosing substance over noise, precision over performance, clarity over chaos. Marcus Aurelius never spoke more than necessary. He never tried to convince the crowd. He governed himself first. Seneca wrote, "I judge you unfortunate because you have never lived without witnesses." Meaning, if you cannot stand alone with your own thoughts, if you cannot exist without being seen, validated, or responded to, you are not yet free. Silence is a mirror, and toxic people avoid mirrors, because when you stop talking, they are forced to face themselves. No distraction, no emotional fog, no chaos to hide behind. Just their behavior, reflected clearly. Your restraint removes their cover. That's why your quietness makes them uneasy. They don't know what you're thinking, what you've realized, what you're planning, where your line is now. Uncertainty replaces control, and uncertainty terrifies someone who relied on predictability. You used to be readable. They knew which button to press, which tone would provoke you, which accusation would pull an explanation out of you. Now they don't. And unpredictability removes leverage. You stop giving people tools to hurt you. You stop handing out maps to your vulnerabilities. You listen more. You reveal less. You observe patterns instead of reacting to provocations. You begin noticing how they fish for information, how they bait you into talking, how they grow uneasy in silence. You become the quiet observer, and people feel it immediately. You don't dominate conversations. Your presence does that without effort. You don't chase attention. Attention recalibrates around you. Remember this: weakness argues, strength states, weakness explains, strength chooses silence, weakness fears being misunderstood, strength knows truth does not need permission. When you speak less, but mean more, your silence becomes a blade, not to wound, not to threaten, but to establish authority without force. Toxic people don't fear your voice. They fear the moment you stop offering it freely. 3. Speak less, control more. There is a moment in personal evolution when you realize something uncomfortable but liberating. The more you explained yourself, the more power you gave away. Toxic people don't listen to understand. They listen to collect data. Every explanation becomes leverage. Every justification becomes ammunition. Every emotional paragraph becomes a handle they can grab later. And for a long time, you didn't know this. You thought explaining meant maturity. You thought clarifying meant honesty. You thought being understood meant being safe. But toxic personalities don't want clarity. They want access. Access to your emotions, access to your reasoning, access to your doubts. That's why silence unsettles them. When you stop explaining, they lose the map. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're planning. They don't know how to provoke the old version of you anymore. And that loss of access feels like loss of control. Notice the shift. You used to over-explain when accused. Now you simply say, "That's not how I see it." You used to defend every boundary. Now you state it once and act accordingly. You used to rush to clear misunderstandings. Now you let people sit with their assumptions, and suddenly they're uncomfortable, because silence forces a reckoning. They replay conversations in their head. They question their own behavior. They wonder what you noticed. Toxic people fear silence because silence removes the distraction. No drama to manipulate, no emotional reaction to exploit, no argument to spin, just stillness. And stillness reflects truth. Stoic philosophy understood this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to persuade others. Seneca warned that those who cannot sit quietly with themselves are never truly free. Silence isn't weakness, it's restraint, and restraint is authority. When you speak less, your words gain weight. A sentence from someone who rarely speaks lands harder than a speech from someone who talks constantly. Your no becomes final. Your pause becomes intentional. Your presence becomes commanding. This is not coldness. This is emotional intelligence. You are no longer reacting from emotion. You are responding from clarity, or choosing not to respond at all. And that choice terrifies manipulative people, because they can fight loudness, they can twist anger, they can provoke chaos, but they cannot fight ambiguity. They cannot attack what they cannot read. When you stop explaining, something powerful happens. Guilt loses its grip, gaslighting collapses, trauma bonds weaken, emotional control dissolves. They accuse, you don't rush to defend. They misinterpret, you don't chase correction. They provoke, you don't engage. And without engagement, the game ends. You begin to understand a deeper truth. You do not owe access to your inner world to people who misuse it. Silence becomes your filter. It separates those who respect you from those who depended on your emotional availability. Some will adjust, some will panic, some will call you cold. Let them. Growth often looks like distance to those who benefited from your confusion. You are not shutting people out. You are protecting clarity. And clarity is expensive. Not everyone can afford it. When you speak less but mean more, your silence becomes a boundary without debate. A boundary that doesn't argue. A boundary that doesn't explain. A boundary that simply exists. And that is why toxic people fear it. Because once you stop explaining yourself, you stop asking for permission. And the moment you stop asking, you take your power back. If this chapter hits something you've been carrying quietly, don't explain it to anyone. Just acknowledge it. Type, "I choose peace" in the comments, not for validation, but as a private marker that you're done negotiating your boundaries. And if you want to continue strengthening this mindset, subscribe and stay close. We don't shout here. We don't argue. We evolve silently. 4. Stop explaining your boundaries. There comes a moment in growth where words stop working. Not because you lack vocabulary, not because you can't explain yourself clearly, but because the person in front of you is no longer listening to understand. They are listening to find an opening. This is where many people stay trapped. They believe that if they just explain better, soften their tone, add more context, or show more emotion, then respect will finally arrive. It doesn't. Because boundaries are not built through persuasion, they are built through behavior. Toxic people don't respond to explanations, they respond to consequences. That's why every time you explain a boundary, they counter it. They say, "You're overreacting. You're being dramatic. That's not what I meant. Why are you making this such a big deal?" Notice something important. They are not confused about your boundary. They are uncomfortable with losing access, and discomfort makes them push. For a long time, you mistook resistance for misunderstanding. You thought, if I clarify, they'll respect it. But clarification only teaches them how to negotiate your limits. Stoicism exposes this illusion. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly, "You don't need to convince anyone of what is right. You only need to act accordingly." The moment you stop explaining, something unsettling happens for them. There is no longer a conversation to hijack, no emotion to weaponize, no justification to twist, just a closed gate and silence. This silence is not passive, it is final. It tells them, "I am not seeking approval. I am not asking for permission. I am not managing your feelings." Most people never reach this stage because guilt pulls them back. They think, "Am I being too harsh? Shouldn't I at least explain? What if they misunderstand me?" But here's the truth most never accept. People who want to understand you don't need long explanations. People who want control will never accept any explanation. So you stop speaking, not angrily, not dramatically, simply calmly. "I won't engage in this. This isn't acceptable to me. I'm stepping away." Then you follow through. No follow-up message, no emotional cleanup, no reassurance. This is where power crystallizes, because now the boundary exists in reality, not language. Toxic people panic here. They accuse you of changing. They label you cold. They say you're distant. They claim you're selfish. But look closer. What they're really saying is, you are no longer accessible, and access was the currency. Stoicism teaches that dignity is not something you argue for. It's something you embody. When you stop explaining your boundaries, you stop performing emotional labor for people who never intended to respect you. You don't raise your voice, you don't threaten, you don't chase understanding, you simply remove access. And this confuses people who were used to your availability. They were comfortable when you over-explained, because over-explaining meant doubt, it meant openness, it meant leverage. But silence after a boundary, that means certainty, and certainty cannot be manipulated. This is the moment your presence changes. You no longer feel reactive. You no longer feel pulled. You no longer feel the urge to prove your intentions. You become still, grounded, unmovable. And the people who are healthy will adapt. They'll respect the line. They'll meet you where you are. The rest will expose themselves through anger, guilt, or withdrawal. Let them. Boundaries don't push the right people away. They filter out the wrong ones. And when you stop explaining your boundaries, you stop inviting debate into your inner world. You stop leaking energy. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop justifying your right to peace. You realize something quietly powerful. Your life does not require consensus. Your nervous system does not need agreement. Your peace does not need to be explained. A boundary spoken once is communication. A boundary enforced silently is authority. And authority doesn't shout, it stands. 5. Silent boundaries. Why calm limits terrify toxic people. Most people think boundaries are something you explain. They believe if they just find the right words, the right tone, the right emotional appeal, the other person will finally understand. That belief keeps people trapped, because toxic people are not confused by your boundaries. They are threatened by them. And nothing threatens a toxic person more than a boundary that is enforced quietly. No arguing, no justifying, no emotional speeches, no defending your reasons, just limits followed by action. This is where real power begins. A toxic person expects pushback. They expect you to debate. They expect you to plead your case. They expect you to over-explain your pain so they can minimize it, twist it, or weaponize it. But when you state a boundary calmly and then stop talking, the entire dynamic collapses. Because now there is nothing to manipulate. Silence after a boundary is what exposes intention. Anyone can say they respect you. Only a few will adjust their behavior when access is limited. This is why Stoicism teaches restraint, not reaction. Marcus Aurelius wrote about guarding the mind like a city gate. Not everyone is allowed inside, and those who disrespect the rules don't get speeches. They lose access. A boundary that requires constant explanation is not a boundary. It's a negotiation, and negotiations invite control. Watch how toxic people respond when you stop arguing. They accuse you of being cold. They say you've changed. They call you distant, selfish, or dramatic. Not because you did something wrong, but because they lost influence. Calm boundaries force clarity. You say, "That doesn't work for me. I won't continue this conversation. I'm not available for that." And then you stop. No follow-up paragraph, no emotional footnote, no attempt to soften the truth so they feel comfortable violating it again. This is what terrifies them, because now the consequence is real. Toxic people don't fear rules. Rules can be tested. They fear boundaries backed by silence, because silence removes leverage. When behavior doesn't change, access does. You reply less, you explain nothing, you disengage without drama, and suddenly they feel it. Their power depended on your emotional availability, your willingness to argue, your need to be understood. The moment you stop offering that, the dynamic flips. This is not punishment. This is self-respect in motion. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with selective access. And not everyone gets a key. A healed person does something toxic people cannot stand. They don't crave company. They curate it. They don't chase connection. They filter it. They don't argue for respect. They require it. This is why your circle begins to shrink. Not because you became arrogant, but because you became intentional. You stop sitting at tables where love comes with conditions, where respect must be earned through suffering, where loyalty only flows one way. You start choosing based on behavior consistency, energy values, not history, not guilt, not loneliness. And that shift is irreversible. Toxic people panic when they realize apologies no longer restore access, because now entry must be earned through change, not words. You no longer react loudly when crossed. You respond quietly by adjusting distance. A boundary crossed once is information. Crossed twice is a choice. Crossed repeatedly is disrespect. And disrespect loses proximity. No announcement, no confrontation, no dramatic exit, just less access. This is where strength becomes visible without force. People reveal who they are when boundaries are enforced silently. Some will adjust, some will resist, some will disappear. All outcomes bring peace, and that is the goal. 6. Selective access. When availability ends, power shifts. There is a quiet moment in personal evolution that most people never notice, but toxic individuals feel immediately. It's the moment you stop being easily reachable, not dramatically, not angrily, not with an announcement, just less available. And that small shift changes everything. For a long time, your presence may have been predictable. You answered quickly, you showed up consistently, you made time, even when you shouldn't have. That reliability felt like kindness to you. But to a toxic person, it felt like entitlement. They grew comfortable knowing you would respond, you would explain, you would engage, you would stay. Availability became leverage, and leverage became control. Selective access breaks that illusion. This is where growth becomes visible, not through words, but through absence of excess. You no longer rush to reply. You no longer rearrange your life for someone who disrespects your time. You no longer stay emotionally accessible to people who create emotional chaos. Nothing is said, nothing is announced, but the energy is different. Toxic people sense it before they can name it, because the version of you that was always reachable is gone. They start feeling a loss of control long before they understand why. They notice. Conversations feel shorter, responses feel calmer, access feels limited, and this unsettles them. Because toxic personalities rely on unrestricted entry into your emotional world. They expect access to your reactions, your explanations, your availability during their storms. Selective access removes that entry point, and suddenly they don't know where they stand. This is why they begin asking questions that sound innocent but aren't. Are you okay? Did I do something? Why are you acting different? What they are really asking is, why can't I reach you the way I used to? Stoicism teaches that control begins with limits. Marcus Aurelius guarded his mind the way a city guards its gates. Not everyone entered. Not everyone stayed. Not everyone mattered equally. Selective access is not rejection. It is prioritization. You begin choosing where your energy goes, instead of letting others decide for you. You stop attending conversations that drain you. You stop offering emotional labor where there is no reciprocity. You stop making yourself constantly available out of guilt, habit, or fear of conflict. And the most powerful part, you don't explain any of it, because explanation invites negotiation, and negotiation invites manipulation. Instead, you let behavior speak. You are polite but unavailable, present but not accessible, calm but not open to nonsense. This creates a new dynamic. People who respect you adapt. They become more intentional, more considerate. But people who relied on control react very differently. They escalate, they push harder, they guilt trip, they accuse you of changing, not because you became worse, but because you stopped being easy. Toxic people don't fear boundaries. They fear boundaries they cannot debate. Selective access is exactly that. You don't argue, you don't justify, you don't persuade, you simply reduce access, and reduction exposes character, because when access is no longer guaranteed, intentions surface. Some people only valued you when you were always available. Some people only felt powerful when you were reachable. Some people only felt secure when they could pull you back into engagement. Selective access removes all of that. Your presence becomes intentional, and intentional presence carries weight. Scarcity creates value, not artificially, but naturally. When you are always available, people take you for granted. When you are selective, people become careful. This is why healed individuals feel grounded. They are not loud. They are not reactive. They are not desperate for connection. They know something most people don't. Not everyone deserves access to your nervous system. You don't need to cut people off aggressively. You don't need to make declarations. You just stop overgiving. You stop answering instantly. You stop initiating without effort returned. You stop making space for disrespect. And this silent shift forces a reckoning. Toxic people feel the distance and panic because distance removes control. They can no longer predict you. They can no longer summon you. They can no longer drain you. They don't know how much access remains. And uncertainty is unbearable to someone who thrives on dominance. Selective access teaches others how to treat you without you saying a word. Your silence does not punish. Your absence instructs. And the lesson is simple. Access is no longer free. It must be earned through consistency, respect, and behavior, not history, not shared trauma, not guilt. This is the moment power truly shifts. Because the most destabilizing thing for a toxic person is realizing you are not angry, you are not emotional, you are not reactive, you are simply unavailable, and that makes you untouchable. 7. Unpredictability, when you become impossible to read. There comes a point in growth where something subtle but powerful happens. You stop being readable, not because you're hiding, not because you're pretending, but because you no longer operate from impulse, insecurity, or emotional exposure. For a long time, people could read you easily. They knew what tone would upset you, what behavior would pull a reaction, what silence would make you anxious, what guilt would bring you back. You were emotionally transparent, and emotional transparency, in the wrong hands, becomes a weakness. Toxic people survive by studying patterns. They don't need to overpower you. They just need to predict you. Once they know, if I say this, they react like that. If I withdraw, they chase. If I accuse, they explain. The dynamic is locked. Control is established. But healing breaks the pattern. As you grow, you begin to close emotional access. Not aggressively, but naturally. You stop oversharing your thoughts. You stop narrating your feelings in real time. You stop announcing decisions before they're made. You stop explaining internal shifts to people who never protected them. Your inner world becomes private, and privacy changes everything. Now when they provoke, the old response doesn't come. When they guilt trip, nothing hooks. When they test boundaries, they meet stillness instead of emotion. This creates confusion, because unpredictability removes leverage. They can't prepare, they can't plan, they can't steer the outcome. You don't respond the same way twice. You don't react on schedule. You don't offer emotional cues, not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer living on autopilot. Stoicism understood this long before modern psychology. Marcus Aurelius did not broadcast intentions. He did not explain himself to unstable minds. He governed inwardly first, quietly. A mind that cannot be read cannot be dominated. This is why toxic people start watching you more closely. They reread your messages. They analyze your tone. They replay conversations. They are searching for the old blueprint, because before they could predict you. Now they can't. And unpredictability creates a specific kind of fear, not fear of conflict, fear of loss of control. They begin asking, what are they thinking? Why didn't they respond like before? Did I lose influence? Are they already done with me? What they're really sensing is this. They no longer have access to your emotional map. You stopped handing it to them. You no longer explain decisions before acting. You no longer justify changes. You no longer reveal doubts mid-process. You move quietly. And quiet movement is dangerous, not to others, but to manipulation. Unpredictability does not mean chaos. It means controlled mystery. You are not impulsive. You are intentional. You don't announce growth. You demonstrate it through distance, consistency, and restraint. You don't threaten to leave. You simply become less available. You don't argue boundaries. You enforce them with behavior. This is what makes you impossible to manipulate. Manipulation requires anticipation. Toxic people need to know how far they can push, how long you'll tolerate, how quickly you'll return. When those answers disappear, so does their confidence. They don't know whether you're observing silently, you've already detached emotionally, you've already decided to walk away, and uncertainty destabilizes them more than confrontation ever could, because confrontation still gives them data. Silence gives them none. This is why unpredictability feels like power. Not because you are plotting, but because you are no longer exposed. You stopped giving real-time access to your reactions. Now your silence has gravity. You may speak less, but when you do, your words land. Because unpredictability commands attention. Your no comes without explanation. Your yes is no longer automatic. Your presence is no longer guaranteed. And guaranteed presence is what made you controllable before. Now your absence is felt. Your distance is noticed. Your stillness becomes a signal. People begin adjusting how they treat you, not because you demanded it, but because they sense the shift. Some will respect it. Some will retreat. Some will attempt to provoke you back into predictability, but you don't return. Because the version of you that reacted on cue, that explained on demand, that stayed emotionally available to instability, is gone. You are no longer readable. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer available by default. And this stage prepares the ground for the final one. Because when unpredictability meets emotional detachment, the connection doesn't weaken. It ends. Quietly, decisively, permanently. 8. The silent exit. When you walk away without noise. There is a moment when everything ends. Not with an argument, not with shouting, not with closure conversations or final explanations. It ends quietly. And that quiet ending is what toxic people fear the most. Because anger still means attachment. Anger still means access. Anger still means you're emotionally involved. But silence means something else. Silence means the decision was already made, long before the exit. When you walk away without noise, you are not reacting. You are concluding. And conclusion without announcement is terrifying to anyone who relied on your emotions to feel powerful. Toxic people expect a scene. They expect tears, confrontation, long messages, final arguments, emotional collapse, because those moments give them leverage. Drama is their oxygen. Reaction is their fuel. But when you leave calmly, without explanation, you deny them both. You don't slam doors. You don't send paragraphs. You don't beg to be understood. You simply stop showing up. And that absence does something words never could. It forces accountability. Words can be debated. Accusations can be twisted. Arguments can be reframed. Silence cannot. When you stop explaining why you're leaving, they are left alone with one thing: their behavior. No one to blame. no one to guilt, no one to manipulate, just consequences. And for a manipulative person, consequences are unbearable because they were never prepared to face themselves. A silent exit communicates something devastatingly clear. I chose myself, and I didn't need you to agree. That is self-respect in motion. You didn't leave to punish them. You didn't leave to teach a lesson. You didn't leave to prove a point. You left because staying required you to abandon yourself, and that cost became too high. This is where emotional maturity shows itself. Strength is not staying and breaking. Strength is leaving and healing. Boundaries don't need speeches, they need action. Your calm departure collapses the illusion of control. Toxic people believe they can always pull you back, with guilt, with fear, with flattery, with chaos. But when you leave and don't return, their certainty dissolves. That's when they realize something painful. You didn't stay because you were trapped. You stayed because you had hope. And you left the moment your growth outgrew that hope. That realization cuts deeper than revenge ever could. Because revenge still means attachment. Growth means freedom. Walking away quietly is not weakness. It is clarity. It is self-respect. It is emotional intelligence at its highest level. You don't win by outshouting them. You win by outgrowing them. You don't prove your worth through struggle. You prove it through distance. And here's the paradox. They understand your value most clearly the moment they no longer have access to it. Not because you punished them, but because you stopped performing. That is the power of absence. You stopped trying to be understood. You stopped trying to fix what refused to change. You stopped explaining pain to people committed to causing it. You didn't disappear into bitterness. You disappeared into growth. You rebuilt quietly. You healed privately. You leveled up without announcement. And suddenly they notice you're calmer, you're lighter, you're unreachable in a way you never were before. They didn't fear losing you when they had you. They fear losing access to the version of you they took for granted. And that is the silent consequence of growth. No revenge, no war, no explanations, just distance, evolution, quiet radiance. This is the 8th behavior. You walk away without noise, without warning, without falling apart. You leave like a door closing slowly but permanently. And the echo of silence does all the talking, because when you stop responding, stop explaining, stop returning, they finally understand something undeniable. You were the blessing, not the one who needed saving. Now you know the truth. Power is not in raising your voice. Power is when you no longer need to. You don't intimidate toxic people by being louder. You unsettle them by being quieter, stronger inside, unaffected, unreachable. Your silence became your shield. Your boundaries became your armor. Your absence became the lesson they never expected. Remember this: you don't win by fighting. You win by outgrowing. You win by not responding. You win by walking away with your soul intact. And when you embody these 8 silent behaviors, you won't need revenge. Your peace becomes the revenge. Your growth becomes the closure. Your presence becomes the message. If this resonated with you, if you felt that internal shift, like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell. We are building a community of minds that move differently. Quiet, disciplined, unshakable. Before you go, comment, "My silence is power. Your future self is watching, and they're proud."